If you've seen almost any of my videos, you probably know I like TypeScript. I don't love it, but there's a lot of things that make it so much better than JS, and since we're all shipping to the browser at some point, it's effectively become a necessary part of all of our tech stacks. The vast majority of JS devs aren't just JS devs anymore, they're TypeScript devs, because it's better. It really is. If you haven't tried it, this is probably not the right video to start. You should go play with TypeScript and use it. But if you are a TypeScript user, today's video is going to make you very excited because 5.8 just went into beta, and there's a couple things in here that are really cool, but there's one in particular that changes a lot. TypeScript's at its best when it is trying to make things that JS already does concrete. TypeScript's at its worst when it's trying to add new features that don't actually exist in JS. Originally, TypeScript had a bunch of those things. Thankfully, they've slowed it down, but this release changes them forever. And I'm so excited to go in depth on why 5.8 makes TypeScript remove a lot of TypeScript. Before we can do that, we need a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is PostHog, and I'm going to assume you've already heard about them, which is why I'm going to ask you, why aren't you using them yet? They make things so much better for product devs. I've been using PostHog's tools for over 3 years now, and I am so happy I started. It has made everything from my analytics to my feature flags to my surveys, especially the surveys, significantly easier to do. And it's not like it costs a whole bunch of money either. It's open source, so you can host it yourself if you really want to, but I don't know why you'd bother. 90% of companies fit under their free tier. So it's free to sign up and get started, super easy to start using, and now you have the best all-in-one suite of product tools available. It's not like they're the cheap alternative to other things. They're the good alternative to every other analytics platform. And take it from someone who's tried all of them. PostHog's the first time I found a stack for analytics that didn't make me desperately hunt to find other places I could go. I've replaced like 8 tools with these guys, and I'm so happy that I did it. Straight up, if I built it, it probably has PostHog set up. All of my major projects have it set up almost immediately. I include them in my tutorials for a reason. I'm so thankful they sponsor because they're a product I genuinely love. Check them out today at soydev.link/posthog. Let's dive in. We're going to go through the whole release notes, and once we get to this part that I think is most important, we'll take some time on that separately. Today, we're excited to announce the availability of TypeScript 5.8 beta. You can start the beta today just by installing TypeScript.beta. Don't know if I'd recommend installing a beta version of TypeScript, especially with some of the new features coming, but this is a really good release. Also of note, TypeScript doesn't do major, minor, like they don't follow Semver. So there's going to be a 5.9, then it's just going to be 6.0. So don't think that 5.8 means it's not a big release. This is one of the biggest TypeScript releases in a while. Check returns for conditional and index access types. Consider an API that presents a set of options to the user. Selected kind is the enum here, items, the text show user, selection kind, whether a user can select multiple options or just a single option, each of the options presented. So it's either a string or a string array, and it depends on which selection type you picked here. Doesn't make it clear, it just says that eventually returns string or string array. Could be a string and it could be a string array. There is a way to handle this, which is to copy paste the function and put a different definition right on top. Like if I just copy this, let's TS playground it. So now we have our show quick pick, and this returns a string or string array. Will const result equals show quick pick some prompt selection kind dot single empty array. Cool. So we pass this selection kind dot single, and result is string or string array. If I await it, doesn't get any better, just string or string array. We don't know. We should be able to know though, because if it's single, it returns one thing. If it's multiple, it returns multiple. The really unfun way to fix this is to double up the definition here. I'm going to get rid of the comment because I don't know how that's going to play with it. And what we do here is change selection kind to selection kind dot single, have it return string, or selection kind dot multiple, return string array, and then finally the actual function. TypeScript function overloading. Okay, I did that right. Overload signature is not compatible with the implementation signature. Oh, it's string or. There we go. Dumb mistake. Since the function that all of these overloads match needs to have all the conditions available, I had to rewrite that. But if I don't have both options available here, it will fail. So what we've done here is we made more specific definitions of our function. So we have show quick pick, which if the selection kind is selection kind dot single, it returns a string. If it's selection kind multiple, it returns a string array. But then we have the actual implementation that can take either single or multiple, and it will return string or string array. What this does is now, whichever one we pass it, it's going to know. But we had to write all of this on top and keep it all perfectly in sync. And I had to go Google search to make sure I was doing it right. This sucks. And I've seen very, very few code bases that bother implementing things this way. So now I want to see how they're making it better. The problem is that the type of show quick pick doesn't make it clear. It just says it eventually returns string or string array. Instead, we can use a conditional type to make the return type of show quick pick more precise. Quick pick return has selection, and this is a type that we can add where depending on what S is, it will update the return type accordingly because it's inferred based on that. Cool. But once we're implementing, it's going to give errors. Oh, because it's a string array isn't assignable to quick pick return and string isn't assignable either. Interesting. I did not know that, but I've also not tried to do this type of inference for this. Yeah, so if we use the code that they showed us there, type quick pick return, it's inferring off of the inputted selection kind, but the problem is that the return doesn't handle all these cases because it doesn't know at this point if string matches the quick pick return type, because even though we're validating here, it's not deep enough, so to speak, for it to know that this means that we are hitting the path that results in this being a string. Seems like that is going to be the thing that they changed. So we'd have to put a type assertion for those return types, which I can do here. And then it shuts up. But that should absolutely not be necessary. Like all of these solutions suck to have types that change depending on what your inputs are. And as if you've seen my return types video that I did in the past, you'll know why I hate doing all these as calls because they can easily override things you wouldn't want them to. So to avoid type assertions, 5.8 now supports a limited form of checking against conditional types in return statements. When a function's return type is a generic conditional type, TypeScript will now use control flow analysis for generic parameters whose types are used in the conditional type. Instantiate the conditional type with narrowed types for each parameter, and they'll relate against the new type. So if I delete these, we get our errors, and I bump this up to 5.8 beta, that's not enough for it to work. So we have to be more explicit and exhaustive in our type for this, where we have the selection type multiple is array, single is string, and then never is an additional case. So I'll change that. That's really cool. That's really cool. And now if I do const value equals show quick pick 2, a selection kind dot single empty array, now it knows that is a promise for just a string. Whew. This is definitely falling within the code that I would say you probably will never have to write unless you're maintaining like a component library or something else that's a SDK that's complex. But for library authors, this is great because it'll make it way easier to write code in your code base as a user or a consumer of these SDKs and have the return types infer everything correctly. That's really, really nice and it's going to provide a great developer experience for a bunch of tools. This is actually a lot cleaner. I like this much more. Here we just make an interface where these are the keys and the values, and then the return type is just on that. Whew, that's so much better. I hate this chaotic, like constant ternary syntax. This is one of the few times I see an interface. I'm like, yeah, this is the right way to do this. Like, yeah, that's really good. That's actually dope. Seeing it like this, I'm going to actually use this pattern now. Previously, it's like, yeah, here it's, oh, yeah, this actually probably makes sense for a ton of people, and I would put this in my own code base. That's great. Wish they opened with that. Yeah, for many users, it's the more ergonomic way. Yeah, this is much more ergonomic. Phenomenal. The catch is that never has to exist in order for it to have a fall-through case. With this, if you try to access something that doesn't exist on the interface, the result is never. So it makes sense that the interface is actually better for that. Ooh, interesting. So if we are doing multiple layers of narrowing, it won't be smart enough. Good to know. Okay, we are too deep in weird types. We're going to keep going. Support for require of ECMAScript modules in -- module node next. This is cool. I've had this problem a few times where things that totally support require instead of import just break TypeScript because TypeScript's like, wait, no, you can't do that in this file. Like Bun lets you use ESM imports and CJS require in the same file. Now it all lets you use both. That's a really nice change. It's going to make Bun devs doing this weird interop stuff much happier. This is funny. They have a Node 18 mode. For users who are fixed on using Node 18, this flag provides a stable point of reference that does not incorporate certain behaviors that are in module node next. Like the require module is disallowed under Node 18, but it is allowed under Node next. Import assertions as well. That's cool. Oh boy. And now the feature that we are here for, erasable syntax only. You might have seen my previous coverage of the awesome things happening in Node regarding type stripping. As of the most recent versions of Node.js, you can just run a TypeScript file, which is awesome because it sucks to just run a TypeScript file. I'll just make a new project here for a demo. Make dir demo ts. If I make a file in here, hello.ts, console.log, sup nerds, have you subbed? And I instinctively type something else. Node hello.ts. Didn't think it would do that. Oh, it's because it's technically valid JS syntax. But if I did like function hello name string hello nerd, now we get an error. The reason we're getting an error is Node doesn't know what TypeScript syntax is. So that colon here is invalid as JS, but it is valid as TS. And once we compile this out to JS, we'll just be removing this. That's fine and dandy, but Node isn't smart enough to do it. Well, it wasn't. Now we have the no experimental strip types option. If we turn on the experimental transform types, I don't know if I'm on the latest version. We'll see if this works. Nope. FNM install 23. Cool. Now, thanks to FNM, which is the fast node manager, it's by Schliz, Schlez, Galstar. It goes by a lot of names. It's so much better than all the other ways to set up Node on your machine. I'm very happy with FNM. But now we have Node 2370. It's slower for Node to tell you what version it's on than to install Node via FNM, which is hilarious. Okay, I had a misconception here I want to clarify. If you have something with just bog standard TypeScript syntax, TypeScript most of us write and work in every day, you don't even need the flag anymore. I can just run node works.ts, and it just works. It calls out the TypeScripting as an experimental feature, but it does run. The problem is when you use certain TypeScript features that aren't real JS features, like enums. So here we have an enum user type. There's two types of users. There are subscribers looking at you, and there are losers, hopefully not looking at you. Our function hello takes a string as well as a user type. If the user type is loser, we log that they should sub. And if otherwise means they're a sub, we thank them. This function gets called here, and it should just work, right? Well, if we node hello.ts, it doesn't. The reason it fails is because there is unsupported type syntax here. Enums are not supported in strip mode because enums aren't a feature that you can just delete. When you look at this file, turning this file into JS that works is literally just deleting things. You delete that, now it's JS. But when you look at this file, you can't just delete things because an enum has to become something. This is the thing I hate about enums, other than the fact that, by the way, subscriber resolves to 0 here. So if you had a check that was if user type, then we do something, this won't get hit on user type.subscriber because that resolves to 0. There are so many dumb quirks like this with enums. Don't use them, generally speaking. But now we have a way to solve this. Well, Node kind of has a way already, which is the experimental transform types flag, which will transform those into something that works in JS and handle that for you. But what if we just didn't have them in the first place? Well, we can do that. There's a new erasable syntax only option. This new option requires that any TypeScript-specific syntax cannot have runtime semantics. So if you're writing code that is in TypeScript, that is TypeScript specific, it can't have specific behaviors related to the runtime. The types themselves have to just describe what you think the code will do in the relationships between things. They can't do things that are specific to the actual JS that comes out on the other side. That means things like enum declarations can't be used, namespaces and modules can't be used, parameter properties and classes can't be used, and the one that actually hurts. I don't want to lose import aliases. Ow. My soul. There's always a catch. There's always a catch. If you're not familiar with import aliases, let me find a code base using them. Literally the first code I opened. Here's a blog post we're about to post. In this blog post, we import from @app/blog or @lib/utils. These are import aliases that were configured in our TypeScript config. Is this the right thing? Yes, tsconfig. In here, you'll see we have as a path that is aliased to /source. These aliases are really nice for managing giant projects. Ow. You can put them in the package JSON at the very least. The ability to do aliases does exist here, but then you still need some build step to output it in a format that can be used in traditional JS stuff. That should be enough for it to work in Node, but it won't be enough for it to work in the browser and other places. Regardless, this is a huge, huge win. I'll probably be turning this on a significant number of my projects because I don't want these features. They just get in the way. And there are so many awesome tools that I really like TS blank space and Amaro, both of which are called out here. I haven't played with Amaro as much, but TS blank space, I've wanted to do a video about this one for a while. Let's say we have our TypeScript code, and this errors when we run it. If the TypeScript was broken out like this, or, like this, we have a bunch of lines here that aren't going to exist in the final version. Like this enum's going to get erased. Name, especially if name is complex like that, let's pretend it's longer. If we have this as our code format, and then this gets compiled into JS, and then it goes to the browser, and then you have an error, how do we tell you the error happened on line 13? Because the output code's going to look very different. The output code's going to look something like this, but the line numbers and the character numbers and everything is entirely different here. So how do we properly do things like point you at the right spot? When we give you the error in the browser, how do we map it to the right character and the right line in the actual code? You might be thinking source maps, but those can get really slow and buggy, especially with really large code bases. And even then, if the source map has to convert from JS to TS as well as from bundle to original source, it's not great. But there's a library that solves this, and it's so clever. TS blank space is hosted by Bloomberg, and it's a really fast solution that is beautifully, genuinely, incredibly dumb. TS blank space takes all the TypeScript syntax and replaces it with empty spaces. Tell me this isn't genius. Tell me this isn't one of the smartest solutions to a stupid problem you've ever seen. Now, you'll always point to the right line and the right character because it's just blank space now. Problem solved. However, if these blank spaces are replacing things that have actual functionality, like enums, that doesn't work. But now, with this new syntax flag, if you combine this with a library like TS blank space, you don't even need a compiler anymore. You just replace all the types with blank spaces, and now, in a zero build environment, you can actually have working source maps without even doing source maps. I legitimately think it's awesome that the TypeScript team sees these useful things happening in the ecosystem. And instead of just waiting for everyone else to figure it out and adding it, they're trying to get in front with the best simplifications and minimal functional tools and options in the compiler so that everything just kind of plays nice together. This is awesome because it's a flag you can turn on in your own code base. And now you'll get type information and errors that will tell you you can't do this if erasable syntax only is enabled. So if we go back in here, we'll use the actual example that we started the video with. If we turn on this config option, so in here, erasable syntax only, cool. Turning this flag on, and now if we go back to our code, you'll see we get an error on the enum because the syntax is not allowed when erasable syntax only is enabled. That's great. So now we'll actually have the ability only use JS in our TS. Not like JS.doc, but honestly a little bit closer, where JS.doc doesn't actually change the JS code that comes out. TypeScript shouldn't, but it does in these cases. And now it doesn't. This allows you to turn off all the TypeScript-specific TypeScript features, which is probably how we should all use TypeScript. I am really, really hyped. And if you really think you're going to miss enums, I have a gift for you. Const user types equal subscriber loser as const. And if you want the type user types. There you go. And now I can change this to, instead of checking user type.loser, just check the string. Ta-da. And now node hello.ts, it just runs with no flags. We are getting the exact same type safety and functionality that we were expecting. Duplicate function implementation. Oh, is it because there's another one in this code base? Yeah, that's why. Or I haven't set up a config to handle that. But you get the idea here. This is so, so cool. You don't have to use enums to have that type of functionality. We can just write a string array as const, make sure that the type here is subscriber or loser. If we delete that, it's just going to be a string array. But if you do the as const here, now you have this fixed set of valid string options. And now we can use the type and we can check against the string itself. This is how it always probably should have been. Don't pretend that enums are this necessary thing in JS land, that we have to have this pure concept or it's not a real language. You can just do a string array, const it, and it's basically working the exact same way. What else is included in this release? Lib replacement flag. Possibility of substituting the default lib files with custom ones. Interesting. So if you want to replace something like libdom, which is the default DOM set of things in TypeScript, you can now replace it with something else. Oh, apparently this is already a thing, but now if you don't want it or you're not using it, you can just disable it. They call out that this is likely to be the default in the future, but if you do want to use it, make sure you turn this on instead. We'll probably go turn this off in all our code bases because we're not using this. And if it incurs actual performance hits, we should turn it off. If you're not using the feature, TypeScript always has to perform the lookup and has to watch for changes in node modules in case a lib replacement package begins to exist. Ugh, gross. Thank you for giving us an option to turn that off. Preserve computed property names in declaration files. Interesting. Computed property name in a class property declaration must have a simple literal type or a unique symbol. Okay. This is the type of error that makes Ryan Florence annoyed. If you have let prop name here and you use it, that value is computed. So it might have changed by the time this was defined and this is being instantiated, which is not super safe. Interesting. So it would give you an error before, but it would still generate what it thinks you're trying to do here, but it might be wrong. Now they just let you do the code and it will emit exactly what you typed in. Note this does not create statically named properties on the class. You still end up with what's effectively an index signature like X string number. So for that case, you need unique symbols. It still is going to be an error, but you can turn it off. Cool. It seems like a lot of the effort here is to make TypeScript behave more like JavaScript. And instead of doing something weird to handle this case, they're doing exactly what you wrote so that the JS on the other end comes out exactly the same. Ooh, and more performance optimizations, my favorite. I have a lot of big TS projects that are not very fast devin anymore. This doesn't affect the code that comes out of TypeScript. This just affects your IDE performance and how quick your compiles get done. TypeScript now avoids array allocations that would be involved when normalizing paths. Ooh, nice. That should be a pretty big performance win if you have a lot of files. Yeah, for a project with many files, it can be a significant and repetitive amount of work. TypeScript now avoids allocating an array and operates more directly on the index of the original path. Nice. Additionally, when edits are made that don't change the fundamental structure of a project, TypeScript now avoids revalidating the options provided to it, like the contents of a TS config. So if the simple edit might not require checking the output paths of a project, not conflicting with the inputs, now it'll just use the results of the last check. This is a huge change, actually. For giant code bases, especially mono repos, this should be a significant performance win. It's hard to measure those things, so I get why they didn't put numbers in, but they're taking the performance stuff seriously, and it's really cool to see. I almost wish I still had like the Twitch code base so I could play with these things and see how big or small the changes end up being. libdts types generated for the DOM might have an impact on type checking on your code base. These are behavioral changes. So if you are going to do this upgrade and you have weird errors, this is the set of things to take a look in. And they announced what they have planned in the future, which is a feature stable release, which is what we have here with the beta. The focus on 5.8 is bug fixes, polish, and certain low-risk editor features. We'll have a release candidate available in the next few weeks, followed by a stable release soon after. This is a really, really good release. I am super hyped for this. It shows TypeScript really moving in the direction I want it to move into, away from a special language with its own special syntax, and towards a really minimal standard for good type definitions and more reliable JavaScript code. This is awesome. I'm really hyped, and I hope you are too. Thank you for sticking through. Hopefully you enjoy the future of TypeScript as much as I do. Until next time, peace nerds.